Deep in a clay pit in central China, a face is staring up out of the earth. It is bronze, green with 3,000 years of age, and it has been waiting there in the dark for a very long time. Its eyes bulge outward on thick cylindrical stalks, straining forward, as if it is trying to see something the rest of us simply cannot. And it is not alone. Dozens of these faces were pulled from the same ground, with knife-edged noses, ears stretched into wings, and mouths set into thin, knowing smiles. They look like nothing else in the entire ancient world. So the obvious question is the one that no one has ever been able to answer. Who exactly made them? Because this culture appears in no history book at all. No ancient chronicle records it. No neighboring kingdom ever bothered to write it down. It is as if an entire civilization stood up, cast 1,000 masterpieces in bronze, and then fell straight out of the story, leaving only their faces behind. They had gold, they had bronze, and they had staggering skill. What they did not have was writing. So they left us no name, no king list, and no explanation at all. This is Sanxingdui. It is the greatest civilization that you were probably never taught, and one that we only stumbled onto entirely by accident. For 100 years, China's origin was told as a single river of history, flowing outward from one northern heartland. These silent faces are the proof that the story was always far bigger than that. Chapter 1. The Well in the Field. The story really starts in the spring of 1929, in a farming village in Sichuan, more than 1,000 kilometers from the old imperial capitals of the north. A farmer named Yan Daocheng was digging a ditch to drain water near his home, when his spade suddenly struck something hard and smooth. Beneath it lay a pit packed with beautiful jade. There were rings, blades, and discs, all buried together in careful, deliberate rows. He had no real idea what they were, so he quietly reburied most of them and sold just a few. For years afterwards, that was all that anyone knew. The jade slowly drifted through markets and missionaries until scholars began to realize that something enormous was buried beneath these 3 low earthen mounds. Those mounds gave the whole site its name, Sanxingdui, which translates as the Mound of 3 Stars. But the real shock waited another 50 years, until the summer of 1986. Workers digging clay for a brick factory struck the edge of a large rectangular pit. Inside was a dense, chaotic tangle of jade, bronze, and burnt bone. Archaeologists rushed in. Within weeks they had opened a second pit beside the first. Together, the two of them held well over 1,000 objects. And these were not quiet little relics. Out of the ground came bronze heads the size of a grown person's torso. Then came a mask so wide that a grown adult could not hold it at arm's length. It was, at the time, the largest bronze mask ever found anywhere on Earth. Then a bronze man, taller than any of the archaeologists digging him out, standing on an ornate pedestal with his huge ringed hands curled around empty air. Whatever he was once holding, a tusk, a staff, a scepter, is long gone. So he simply stands there, gripping nothing, for reasons that no one alive can read. For decades, that seemed to be the whole story. And then, in 2021, it exploded all over again. Archaeologists announced 6 brand new pits, found right beside the original 2. This time they were ready for them. Wearing sealed protective suits under glass canopies, they lifted out thousands more objects, including an intact giant gold mask and the faint imprint of the oldest silk ever found in the region. All told, across every pit, the site has now given up more than 17,000 objects. And each new one seems only to deepen the puzzle. Chapter 2. Faces from Nowhere. To understand why these objects are so deeply unsettling, you first have to know what the rest of Bronze Age China actually looked like, because 1,000 kilometers to the north, the Shang dynasty was casting bronze too. But they poured their genius into ritual vessels, into cauldrons and cups for offering wine and food to their ancestors. Sanxingdui made almost none of that. Instead, they made faces. Enormous, staring, superhuman faces, over and over again. The strangest one of all wears its eyes on cylindrical stalks that jut a full 15 centimeters straight out of its face. Local legend remembered a first king named Cong, who was said to have had protruding eyes. So some believe this mask is a god, or that very founding king, built so he could see across worlds. The tallest object of them all is a bronze tree, nearly 4 meters high, hung with birds and fruit, with a dragon pouring down its trunk. It may well be a sun tree from myth, a kind of ladder stretched between the earth and the sky. 9 birds roost in its branches, perhaps the very sons of an old creation story. They also cast great bronze discs, ribbed like the spokes of a wheel, that many believe were images of the sun itself. And then there was the gold. A gold mask, beaten wafer-thin and wrapped over bronze, wearing the very same commanding eyes and heavy brows. Here is why that detail matters so much. In the north, power was always shown in bronze. At Sanxingdui, the very top of the hierarchy shone in gold instead, a completely different idea of what a king should be. There was even a golden staff, well over a meter long, engraved with fish, with birds, and with arrows piercing straight through them. A staff of gold as the mark of a ruler is common right across the ancient Near East. In China, it is almost completely unheard of. So where on earth did that idea come from? For all of this dazzling sophistication, they left behind barely a trace of writing, just a small handful of scratched symbols that no one has ever managed to decipher. That silence is the deepest part of the whole mystery. We can hold their gods in our hands and still not read one single sentence that they ever thought. Chapter 3. The deliberate burial. Now for the detail that turns a treasure into a genuine riddle. Almost nothing in those pits was buried whole. The masks were cracked. The great bronzes were snapped clean apart. Many had been deliberately burned and even shattered before they ever went into the ground. This was not a tomb, because there are no bodies in it. And it was not a hoard hidden away from thieves. It looks instead like a vast and deliberate act of ritual. Elephant tusks were stacked over the wreckage by the dozen, and then the whole thing was sealed. So these objects were not lost at all. They were given up, quite deliberately, on purpose. Those tusks carry a clue of their own. Elephants mean a much warmer, wetter Sichuan than today, and hint at trade reaching far beyond the basin walls. And not long after all this, around 3,000 years ago, the city itself was abandoned. The walls emptied out. The bronze workshops went completely cold. The people themselves did not simply vanish into thin air. Their style, their bronzes, and their gold all reappear a short distance away, at a site called Jinsha, near modern Chengdu. There the culture flickers on for a few more centuries, still working its beloved gold, and then it too quietly fades out of the record. So why would anyone abandon a thriving city at the very height of its art? The honest answer is that nobody actually knows. A shifted river, a catastrophic flood, a war, a sudden change of gods. Every one of those theories fits a little, and yet none of them fits all of it. Now, this is exactly the point where the internet likes to shout one particular word: aliens. It is easy to see why. The faces look so strange that they feel like they came from another planet. But the archaeology tells a very different and far more human story. We have the clay molds. We can trace the styles evolving, slowly, across local generations. These are the work of human hands, learning and refining a craft over centuries. The truth is stranger than aliens, and better. A real human culture, right here on Earth, imagined its gods so differently from its neighbors that 3,000 years later, we can barely recognize them. Because they wrote nothing at all down, the reason for all of it went into the ground along with the masks. And it is still there. Chapter 4. Rewriting the Cradle. Step back from the individual artifacts, and Sanxingdui quietly rearranges the entire map of early China. The old textbook said civilization here had a single cradle, the Yellow River in the north, and that it spread outward from there like ripples in a pond. But Sanxingdui sat behind a wall of mountains, in the sheltered Sichuan basin, cut clean off from that heartland. And it was every single bit as advanced. It mastered high bronze casting at almost the very same moment as the Shang, and yet it built a completely separate world of gods, of symbols, and of kings. It was not sealed away from the world entirely. Cowrie shells from distant seas, imported metal, and shared casting techniques all show that it traded across enormous distances, but it borrowed without ever once bowing. It took in outside ideas, and then made something that absolutely no one else on Earth was making. So the picture that archaeologists now draw is not one river at all, but many. A whole constellation of regional cultures, each with its own genius, all feeding into what would eventually become China. Sanxingdui is simply the brightest star in that whole constellation, the one that history somehow forgot to write down. Today those faces are back above the ground, lit up in glass cases in a vast museum in Sichuan, drawing in millions of visitors every single year. We can date the bronze, we can weigh the gold, and we can scan the alloy right down to the atom. What we still cannot do is read one single word of what they actually believed. The most extraordinary civilization of Bronze Age China is one that we met entirely by accident, and one that, even now, we still cannot name. New pits are still being opened at Sanxingdui right now. So if a whole civilization can hide underground for 3,000 years, what else is still waiting down there? New video